Okay, the speakers before me were talking about issues at a global scale. I'm going to talk to you about protected areas in Africa which are at a much smaller scale. But don't make a mistake of thinking that these don't meet. If we take this little label here, this little badge, believe it or not, you only need to double that 29 times to get to what? The Earth. Double it 5 times, you get to a football. 29 times to the size of the Earth. So that kind of puts these things into perspective, where the micro meets the macro. Second thing I'd like to mention is, sorry, there's a picture here somewhere which we should be starting with. I've just come out of a couple of days in discussions with Disney. Michael was talking about intergenerational issues, his grandparents, his children. My daughter was a couple of years old when the first Lion King was released. They're about to release the second Lion King. It's going to be absolutely magnificent, by the way. We've got a sneak preview. Do you know that lion populations in those 20 years have halved in just 20 years? And is there anyone that wants to hazard a guess as to how many lion are left on the African continent? 20,000. Yeah, that's all. So the third biggest industry in Africa on which people are dependent in terms of employment and in terms of which economies, societies are dependent on, with lion as a key component of that, 20,000 of them left. So I'm going to be talking to you about some of the challenges that are facing protected areas, and then also a little bit about the solutions that we can offer and we present. This is a picture of a national park in Malawi where we are having our relationship with Americares. Why does something like this happen? Well, it happens because natural resources have value. It's something where a rhino's horn has $16,000 per kg on the front of its face. It literally takes one bullet and people put $16,000 per kg in their pockets. Okay? A 1-year-old rhino has 1 kg of horn on it. So it's something where it's that simple. Ivory, $200 a kg. You can see here in this photograph that the area has been entirely denuded in terms of wood, of trees. At 20 cents a kg for charcoal, it's something where it makes sense to extract that. Bush meat at $5 a kg. This is a national park, an absolutely pumping little national park in Malawi, incredibly beautiful. It represents one meal if you were to consume everything in it for the people around it. One meal. And then what's left? Nothing. So clearly it makes sense to look after these last protected areas in Africa. And that's what we as African parks do. We enter into partnerships with government to be able to help them look after their last protected areas. In the United States, Google tells me that there's something like 25,000 registered museums. There are only 1,200 protected areas in the whole of Africa. And according to the European Union, only 300 that have any meaningful scale in terms of the very issues that the previous speakers were talking about. Watershed protection, carbon sequestration, mitigation of climate, stabilizing climate change, etc. Only 300. Of the 300, 40 are properly managed. 40. And if a protected area isn't being looked after, it will be lost. Simple as that. So what I'm going to do, though, is tell you a little story about, and that's where we manage, the areas that we manage, 15 of them across 9 different countries, 26 million acres. I work in hectares and square kilometers. I'm told that you work in acres and square miles. 40,000 square miles, 26 million acres. Going to put into perspective, that's 50% of the US National Park System that we manage as an organization. So I'm going to tell you a little story about one of these, Majeti Wildlife Reserve in southern Malawi. The government came to us in 2003 and said, we're desperate. This park, for all intents and purposes, is lost. when we did our first assessment of the area, we literally found more poachers' camps than animals that we saw. It wasn't difficult because we didn't see a single live animal, not one. Literally had been entirely wiped out. The guards that were working there hadn't been paid in 6 months. There hadn't been a single tourist in those gates for 5 years, not surprising because there was nothing to see. So it's and the edges of it were beginning to be cleared and felled for charcoal. So Majethi, for all intents and purposes, had been lost to society. So what did we do? We signed a long-term agreement with government. We typically sign it for 25 years with a right to renew. And then we set about getting it work. This is where it is, just to put into perspective. So you've got Malawi, for those that are looking at this screen, very small country, the second most population dense country in the whole of Africa, and incredibly poor, with 70% of the population living under $2 a day. Very, very poor, but a remarkable country nonetheless though. And just for perspective, those are the 2 other parks that we manage as well. So when we started, the first thing that you've got to do, it always sounds like it's the hard side of conservation. It often is. But all of you, I think, are used to living in a system and in an economy, in a political economy, where law and order is a given. We're talking about areas here where law and order is often non-existent, where an AK-47 costs $20 to buy. And with $20 and with an AK-47, you can do whatever you want to do in terms of an environmental cost and in terms of a human cost. Quick digression. The first park that we started in Liwa Plain in Zambia, there were 54 murders in the first year from people with weapons. 2 years later, that was down to 0. But you can only do that by bringing a basic law and order to the system. And once you have that, you can start to then build wildlife, and you can build benefits for people. So get on with the law enforcement, put all of that in place. All the infrastructure for the park. You can't manage a park without roads, without telecommunication systems, without workshops, without housing. The only infrastructure in the park was the result of a World Bank project where the money had run out when that got up to the window level. And that was it. So no infrastructure. So we built literally hundreds of kilometers of roads, bridges, causeways, as I say, staff housing, whatever infrastructure is necessary in order to be able to run the protected area. Then we started bringing back the wildlife. Okay, it's something where you can't have a functioning ecosystem with the major components of the ecosystem. So in the first 2 years, we bought 2,500 head of what we call plains game, things like buffalo, sable, warthog, impala. I think it was 15, 16 different species that we brought back again. After that, elephant, a major part of the ecosystem. So we brought, in that particular park, over 300 elephant back into the system to be able to start being the overall architects of the park. After that, black rhino, an important species, that's incredibly valuable, and also only about 20,000 left on the entire continent. Bringing rhino back into Malawi means now that Malawi is one of about 7 or 8 range states that now have rhino. After that, the predators. Okay, you can't bring things like lion into a system until there's enough for lion to eat. So it's something where you've got to allow those founder populations of the other species to build up. As a result, now we've got a thriving lion population. With the wildlife back again, now you can start to build a tourism industry. All right, I mentioned it started out with absolutely nothing. We now have 3 different camps, 3 different facilities that are in the park that people can be able to visit. Which means then that today, that park, which had not had a single visitor in it for 3 years, now has 9,000 visitors a year. 4,500 of those are Malawians that are all coming to visit their national park. So you're starting to build the pride of local Malawians about their natural assets. It's something where The income generation, without a visitor, you can't have $1 of income. This park now generates about $500,000 a year, which also is a very good proxy for economic activity and poverty alleviation. But there's one thing that I haven't mentioned so far in any of the things that we've done, and that's the people side. Incredibly important. In Africa, protected areas have to be about people and for people. It's a choice of land use, and if you want these areas to survive into the future, they have to be valued by local people. Simple things like education, schooling, absolutely non-existent. So I think we've built now 17 different schools around the park that allows children to be able to sit in an area where if it's raining, they are still having their daily education. Likewise, to start building basic economies. The more people that have an economic stake in an area like this, the better. So the establishment of women's groups, of beading, of curios, it doesn't take a lot to make a difference. When people don't have $2 a day, $2 a day becomes a livelihood. And there are so many different things that one is able to achieve with that. In terms of things like simple honey production, we are now, it's early days yet, but we're producing about 5 tons of honey per crop from all these different beekeepers. With just 6 hives, an individual is able to earn an income and a livelihood forever. Basic health services. So it's something where one of the things that people really appreciate the most in any of the parks that we operate is basic health. But you know what? I know how to catch elephants. I know how to be able to reintroduce rhinos. We know how to do law enforcement. We know how to engage with politicians around these conservation issues. But it's something where we don't employ any doctors. We don't employ any healthcare professionals. So how do we go about making sure then that we have the right partners to be able to help us do that? And that's where we met Americares, and it's something where the partnership that we have that's growing with Americares, we are so incredibly excited about, because we believe that that is something where it can take the benefit of these protected areas into a way greater community, and in a manner that they understand, that connects the park with them. Very, very important, and that helps them to then treasure the park going forward, that creates the long-term sustainability.